Intelligent talk that's sure to raise the IQ. Here's Guy Wehman, Ben Brunson, and Frank Vernuccio, Inside the News.
Welcome back to Inside the News. Glad to have you with us, whether it's on our radio affiliates. We want to thank them all across the country, and you'll see a shout-out on our affiliate shout-out here on YouTube. Thank you so much for carrying our program. We've got Frank Vernuccio. He's in your top left. Ben Brunson, he's right down below us here, and he's with himself. He's the author of the Falstaff, Enigma, and Esther, Sling. Frank's with the American Analysis of News and Media. Okay, Ben, let's talk about Venezuela a little bit. And we don't want to be like Venezuela, do we?
No, the chaos and the destruction of wealth and the destruction of government infrastructure continues apace. Nicolas Maduro has become a third world banana republic dictator, and it is unbelievable how poor Venezuela is getting continuously. This oil-rich nation, which ostensibly has more oil reserves than any country on the planet, has no more oil. There's no more gasoline available. They have to import refined gasoline from Iran in order to have gasoline at the pumps. They have no more ability. The entire infrastructure, oil infrastructure, has collapsed and failed. And I was just reading an article in Bloomberg. And Bloomberg, if you don't know, it is a business magazine, but is hardly a conservative voice. It has become a very woke liberal organization, unfortunately. Not what it used to be 10 years ago or so, but it's become very woke. But even Bloomberg has written a great article from inside Caracas discussing how the entire water system is now failed inside Venezuela, and people no longer have running water, and they are reliant on rainfall. And this is in Caracas, which is the one area that Maduro tries to maintain on some level, so he has some type of base supporting him. But even in Caracas, the system has failed. The water that does pump through the pipes is dirty, filthy water that has to be sterilized. And the article lays out how the water's not running for a good portion of every day. And people put pots and pans out to collect rainwater when it comes down, so they can use that to wash their hands or take sponge baths. It is a horrible system. That is what socialism brings about. Is what happens. It is the inevitable of what happens when you get rid of the market system and you no longer have market prices that allow for supply and demand to work. It is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union, exactly why the Soviet Union failed and collapsed utterly. And we're repeating, just a generation later, repeating the exact same experiment in Venezuela with the exact same consequences and outcome. And yet, in this country, we have a ridiculous percentage of young people calling for that system to be implemented here. It's a stunning level of ignorance, really.
You know, Frank, growing up, I watched a golf tournament, and it was down in Venezuela, and the Shell Oil Company, they sponsored it, and they were showing all of these oil fields out there in the water off the coast of Venezuela, and Ben mentioned Caracas and how beautiful that was and how rich the country is, and it's amazing how when you have the leadership that takes it really down the wrong path, which is what these anarchists want to do here in this country, that things can just turn south in a heartbeat and you can be really poor.
I had the opportunity before Hugo Chavez took over to meet some of the people in finance in Venezuela. And in addition to a nation that is awash in an ocean of oil and therefore should be extraordinarily rich, it's a nation that also has an educated and hardworking population. I've known many of them. And it is stunning that a nation with that many cultural advantages, that many natural resource advantages, could fall so hard and so fast. It is, as Ben has stated, the inevitable outcome of socialism, the system that so many want to bring to the United States. Those who support socialism in the U.S. continue to tell us, don't worry about every example. on every continent over the past 100 years. We're going to be different. We'll make it work. Well, that's sheer, total, and utter nonsense. Socialism's ultimate legacy is failure, and not just minor failure, but dramatic failure, as we've seen in a great nation like Venezuela. At one point, Venezuela was prepared to take its ranks among the great nations of the planet in terms of wealth, in terms of education, in terms of scientific advancement. They were really up there with all the great first world nations. Socialism came in, and now it is an absolute hellhole. It's an object lesson for the socialists in the United States, one that I fear they're never going to learn.
Ben, Barack Obama, Bill Ayers, the Weather Underground, he was indoctrinated in all of this back in the 60s. And he wanted to fundamentally change America. And yet when he was elected, he got some of this started, but and they were all hoping Hillary was going to be elected. And Donald Trump's starting to tear things apart. But this is still coming out of that same thinking back from the 60s, isn't it, Ben?
Well, there's still a lot of those individuals around. It was a popular ideology 50 years ago, and most of those kids grew up and got jobs and understood what it takes to create wealth and how great this country is at doing just that and enabling the average person to achieve substantial wealth. But, you know, our education system has been taken over by socialist-minded educators, and that is why so many kids come out of university systems with this warped ideology. You know, there's a piece of economic history, and I'm an economist by training and a historian by avocation. There's an economic history that your wealth is dependent, this has been taught for 70 years, that your wealth is dependent on your natural resources. The U.S. is wealthy because it had abundant natural resources, which have been utilized and ravaged by capitalists. Venezuela shows how false that ideology is. You can't be wealthier than Venezuela, and yet they have nothing. And it's the system and the rule of law and the capitalist system that brings about wealth creation. It's not natural resources. And that is, Venezuela puts a lie to that entire branch of economic history, but it's still taught to this day.
All right, that's going to finish up this segment here. And we did not even get a chance to talk about China. There's a lot going on there. And the border wall, isn't it interesting? Chaz or Chop, they want to put up a wall, and yet they did not want the United States to put up a border wall. We've got a lot more to come. We've got a couple more segments yet to go. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.